Hello, everyone. What we're going to do today is I'm going to have another tutoring session. And I thought that one of the things that we could do is once again take a look at some of these example test bank questions that you'll see on an upcoming quiz or perhaps your comprehensive final exam. Now, to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you. And I am going to open up this quiz. Now, what I've done here is I'm previewing this quiz as a student. What the screen looks like on your end doesn't exactly look like what you see, but it's close enough. And once again, I was randomly chosen 50 questions. Every time I redo this, I get another random selection of questions. Who knows which ones that were going to come up. Hopefully, there'll be some good questions for us here. I'm not going to go over all of them, but you'll get the idea, and hopefully that'll be useful to you. All right, so the first one is one of those graphical questions, and the solution is already here. They've already dragged and dropped it, but that's pretty easy. These are the figures that are directly from your textbook. Here's the drawing of the mental map. This is the distance decay. This shows the diffusion of a disease. This shows a person's activity space. All right, those are, you could look at the textbook figures and get the answer to those. Those ones aren't too difficult. All right, under preference maps, individuals generally have their own preconceived notions of what places are like. And so, as part of the study of mental maps, what they did was they asked college students, where would you most want to live after you graduate? And these are students from British Columbia, and not surprisingly, they all wanted to live around Vancouver, British Columbia, and those were from Ontario, Canada. Well, they wanted to live in Toronto. Not a lot of them wanted to live in the United States, and then a lot of them liked the west coast of Canada, Vancouver area too. And then what about students from Quebec? Well, these are the French Canadian students, and they would want to live in the St. Lawrence corridor. They want to live in Montreal, but they also like the big northeastern cities of the United States and Louisiana area, because Canadians, Cajuns, French-speaking Louisianians are part of that, and they also like the west coast of the United States and west coast of Canada, British Columbia, Vancouver area too. So those are population preference maps. See, for the most of them, Canadian students generally don't want to live in the United States if they can do it. And if you live in Vancouver, why would you want to live anywhere else? Let's take a look at some other ones. Hopefully, we'll get pull some decent questions here. Okay, migration factors, push factors, and pull factors. Well, there was the that TED Ed video about how you can use geography during a zombie apocalypse, and one of the things that came up was uh, the push factors and pull factors in my understanding migration. The pull factors are the things that make you want to go there. They're pulling you there. For example, a nice climate, low taxes, availability of jobs, a safer place, and a nice environment, natural amenities, whatever kind you like, either the mountains or the beach. And then push factors are the things that drive you away. You know, widespread poverty or war, you'd be a refugee, a famine, you'd leave, unemployment or overcrowding. Those are all those bad things, and they push you away. In helping to understand migration factors. Okay, which is the best example of a subsequent superimposed boundary? This is a question from chapter 8 on political geography, all about the different types of political borders of countries, borders or boundaries. Let's see, it's superimposed. It's subsequent to settlement, and it's also superimposed there. The the best example of that is of these is the borders of the former British colonies in Africa. Those were superimposed. You could say that about the colonizers in Africa in general. They superimposed those boundaries on the local ethnic groups there, so that you had situations with the colonization of Africa where the same tribe would be split in two because you have the British colony on one side and the French colony on the other side. All right, so that's what they're looking for there. You may see a question about boundary types. There's several of those. All right, the world's largest state in terms of territorial extent is Russia. Russia is the largest country in the world in aerial terms, certainly not in population terms. China is the biggest country. Canada is slightly larger than the United States, but Russia is the largest country in the world. It'd be interesting if they had a question about which is the smallest country in the world. All right. Somehow or another, on a quiz or your final exam, you have to have something about diffusion. Sometimes it's cultural diffusion. In the K-12 education, where they talk about the five themes of geography, what they call it is movement, because kids in K-12 education, they might not understand what diffusion is. What are they talking? They might think of diffusion across cell membranes in biology, but it means the movement, the flow of people, the flow of goods, and so forth. All right, so the best answer there is movement. Okay, under barriers to migration. Quotas on immigrants constitute what kind of barrier to migration? See, there might be a barrier to migration. There might be, a natural barrier like a mountain or a river that would slow down migration, and there can be other barriers, although not physical, they're still just as real. And so, for example, if a country has a quota on how many immigrants they can take in, they can't take in anymore, that would probably be political, and that it's part of their law. All right, you can have other kinds of barriers that are just as real as a mountain barrier. Sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's economic that provides a barrier. Okay. Yes, okay. The age group in the United States that is most likely to move is, well, it's the younger people. Like your age, college age, young adults, 20 to 24 would probably be the most likely. In the United States, Americans are highly mobile. The average person moves several times during their life, and generally the young people, they go where the jobs are. I think in the first discussion board where that was the icebreaker that I asked you a question, where do you want to live and work after you graduate? And, sometimes you just have to go where the job is. You might have been born in North Carolina, but if you have a job available in California, you would likely take that. And the older people tend not to move as much. Well, related, what about when the old people do move? The migration of retirees to Florida and Arizona is an example of channelized flows. When people move from one area to another, uh, they may know somebody in that new area, and if one person moves to South Florida and they like it and they encourage their friends to go there, so you end up with a river of migrants that are flowing like a stream, and so that's called channelized flow. Okay, you'll probably see a question like this on a quiz or a final as well, in that there's territorial morphology, that means the shape of countries. It's one of the concepts in political geography. And you have the different ones. Now the answer is given here for you. You have shapes that are compact, circular, hexagonal, fragmented, broken into a number of pieces, like island countries, shoestring-like, elongated ones. Oh, like Vietnam or Chile or maybe Italy. Prorupt, which is basically compact, but with one or more peninsular extensions coming off of it. And this was called perforated. There's very few political examples of this in the world, but there's the Republic of South Africa, and there's actually another country, another government within the territorial border of South Africa, Lesotho is another country. That's not part of the political subdivisions of South Africa. That's a whole other country. There's not a whole lot of those situations in the world. I can think of another one. How about Vatican City? Vatican City is an independent country, but it's within Rome, which is within Italy. So, technically, Italy is uh, slightly perforated, but this one's at a large enough extent you can show it on a political geography map. All right, maybe a couple more. That way we'll call it an even dozen. Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia are examples of what type of 20th century terrorism? Well, that's state terrorism. And then what about the capital city? A capital city spatially associated with its core region is commonly found in unitary states. The states that are unitary are more ruled by the one central government. So if there's a country and it has a concentrated core region, it's probably more unified or unitary in that the show is run from that capital city. Some other countries are more federal. They give a lot of power to the individual political subdivisions, their states or provinces and so forth. Okay, well, those are just a few examples. With the luck of the draw, it doesn't seem like we got all of that interesting questions to talk about. So let me try it again and see if we can come up with a random set of another 50. Oh, now don't tell anybody you've seen this stuff. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to preview this quiz as a student again. I can see I'm getting the graphical ones straight off. Must be they're not so migrant, they're not so random. All right, how about this one? The area within which we move freely on our rounds of regular activity is known as our activity space. Okay, now this one, the now universal idea of the modern state was developed in the 18th century by political geographers in what world region? Europe. Okay, now yeah, in the olden days, countries didn't necessarily have to have a border that was on a map. In many cultures, they didn't delineate where the end of their territory was. They just always lived in this region. So sometimes the border area would be ill-defined. You might say that carving the world up into 200 countries, that's just an invention of European political geographers. Okay. A no longer functioning boundary line that is marked by some landscape feature or differences on the two sides is a relic boundary, in that it's no longer a boundary, but you may still find evidence of it, either physically on the landscape or cultural expression as well. One good example of a relic boundary is the border between Scotland and England. Uh, the Roman Empire took over a portion of the British Isles, but they didn't take over Scotland, and they built Hadrian's Wall to keep the marauding barbarian Scotsmen from invading the area to the south. So even though uh, Scotland and England are all part of the same country today, you can go to northern England and see the old relic boundary between the Roman Empire and the Scots, and it's still delineated with a relic boundary. You can also go to Germany and see they preserve some areas of the Berlin Wall, which is now it's a relic of the Cold War. All right, now this one is a pretty good question. It's one of the ones I often ask. What is a nation state? Well, you have to know what a nation is, and you have to know what a state is, and then so what's a nation state? The problem is we use the word nation in two completely different ways. Actually, in two opposite ways. We use the word nation sometimes as just meaning a country. The United States is a nation, right? Okay. But there's a connotation for nation. There's the other meaning. When you say nation, you mean a people or an ethnic group, a people that have a shared cultural heritage, which doesn't always match up with the political borders of a country. Well, what's a state? State means country. I don't want to have to go back over political geography and go over state means country. Yes, the United States has 50 states, but um, they're not independent countries. Other countries also have states. For example, Mexico has states. India has states. Brazil has states. Those are the individual political divisions of a country. Canada doesn't have states. What does it have? It has provinces. Okay, there's political. They don't mean that. Okay, state means a country. Okay, for example, the State Department in our federal government, what do they do? Hillary Clinton was at one time she was Secretary of State. What state? Well, not New York or Arkansas or anything like that. Not that kind of state. She was Secretary of State, meaning the entire country. The United States is the country. So there's the people of a nation, and then there's the political entity of the country. And so if you have those situations where the people and the country overlap each other, then you have what's called a nation state. And I always used to ask on exams back when I used to have essay questions that explain why the nation state concept is something that all nations uh, want to have, and all states also aspire. All nations and all states aspire to be nation states. Explain. Well, there's relatively few of those left in the world due to so much globalization and migration and so forth. But you could probably pull out some nation states. A good example is Japan. The Japanese ethnic group and the political borders of Japan match up pretty closely. Or Poland is probably another one. And France is probably also another one. Sweden is one, but I don't think you could call the United States a nation state. The United States is a nation, and the United States is a state, or it's a country, but it's not a nation state. You might say that we're a multi-ethnic society. Sometimes you could say it's a plural society. Uh, we have many nations within this country. Let me do one more. Switzerland is an example of a multinational state. Right? It's a country, but you have your French Swiss, you have your German Swiss, and you have your Italian Swiss. So you have those three different nationalities in the same state or country. All right. Well, we may have to do this again sometime and hope for a better luck of the draw. Some of these concepts I do talk about during lecture, and some of the other ones we've seen before. All right, I'm going to go ahead and sign out of the video now.